Discussing with Deputy Roy Herissier and Hugh Raymond and Roy Travert the sport strategy, the Green Paper, which has come out from Roy Herissier's department. I must express a personal interest. I was delighted the other day to hear that Fats Domino is 85, which rather sums up my interest in sport and my personal activity level. But who actually wrote the document, Deputy?
The document was written within the department, but obviously people like myself and Derek Delahaye signed it off and made modifications as the process went along. Yeah.
It had the feeling to me about something that might have been inspired by the Treasury Department user pays policy, which is obviously doing the rounds. Was that significant or not so?
No. I know there are various theories that this is some kind of Trojan horse to privatisation, this is some kind of way of dealing with the Fort Regent issue and so forth. But no, the feeling was it's been over 10 years since there was a sports strategy. Derek has done a fantastic job, but a lot of it has grown around him as a person and the kind of network and contacts that he has. We've grown things like the sports development officers, we've got them, and Hugh is very experienced here, having worked as one. We've got them in 7 areas at the moment, but we haven't got them in a team as such. We've had the fantastic success of the Jersey Rugby Club, but we've had the controversy about aspects of the funding. We participate a lot in international and national games like the Jeux, the Commonwealth Games, the Island Games, and there are different models being used by different jurisdictions. You've got Sports Guernsey, which is a very interesting model. You've got how local authorities have dealt with it. Often, I have to say, the privatisation route. All those questions are bubbling up.
What do you make of it, Roy?
Well, I think the report is a blatant attempt to privatise Fort Regent, but not just Fort Regent, to privatise sport in general in Jersey. What the politicians are not saying is that this document clearly states that they are going to hand over £50-odd million worth of assets to the private sector if a public-private partnership is set up. And what we have to look at is a lot of people don't have the information. The Institute of Directors held a meeting when Senator Cohen was Senator, and in that meeting Senator Cohen clearly stated that Fort Regent would be set out for public-private partnership. Now, this document clearly states this. We're on question 2, because it's set out in 4 parts. The first part is options for consideration, no change. Now, we would certainly support that option as option 1, that there should be no change. The sports facilities at Fort Regent are second to none in Jersey, and all we get all the time in the paper is that Fort Regent is a derelict building, and it couldn't be further from the truth. Now, to go along with this document, we've also had, as you quite rightly said before, a Treasury Department. We've had Assistant Treasury Minister Eddie Knoll categorically say in the States, not 2 weeks ago, that a civil servant is going to be appointed to sort Fort Regent out once and for all. Now, this is also not being reported in the media. This consultation document, in its present form, is a frame form to sign over all of our sports facility to a public-private partnership, which the document clearly states will be subsidised by the taxpayer again. We have some of the best facilities in Europe at Fort Regent, with Le Cannevet, with Springfield, and this document clearly states that. So why would we want to hand over these facilities and continue to subsidise them to the private sector?
What do you say, Hugh? What's the Sports Council view?
Well, the Sports Council view is much wider. I mean, I think that if you try to isolate it to Fort Regent, then you're isolating specific sports. I'm looking at generally across the island. You've got to look at, and I don't know the exact figures, but if you take most of the sports facilities, football pitches, cricket pitches, is still owned by the states. They have an obligation to make sure that they provide the facilities for the people in the island, and I think I very much agree with Roy that I think that we go down this route. I'm just slightly concerned with what Roy has just said to my left, and that is that this is an opportunity for every sportsman out there. Now, we've got something like 26,500 people that are members of sports clubs. That's from everything you can think of, and you could be as bizarre as Tiddlywinks to equestrian, if you see what I mean. If you take 26,000, they have parents, 1.5. You've got 50,000 people that are affected by sport. This is an opportunity for them to actually get out there and say what they actually want for the island. I think to isolate it is dangerous, because I don't think that that's the route that we should go. We have to provide the facilities and the infrastructure for people to be able to play sport. I do agree that it's one of the most important factors of the island as well, because there's lots of things to do, and the arts come into play and everything else, but the main thing is, if you look at what goes on at the weekend, then it's sport driven. If you keep even the planes going from Jersey to Guernsey and people going backwards and forwards to France, England, if you look at the weekend, it's sport, and that's what we have to try.
I bristle a bit because there's so much about this document about sport for health. Now because I'm a non-participant, and I see people, broken legs, torn ligaments, this is the competitive sport level.
But that's competitive sport.
And it is, but it can also be fairly recreational. I mean, if you play rugby, it's going to be competitive. But you can play rugby at a fairly low level, and you do run the risk of injuries. And every team that gives, has a physiotherapist, and doctors seem to be in attendance. It doesn't strike me as being as healthy as, say, dancing or something, swimming, fairly recreational swimming. There are lots of activities which involve exercise which aren't dangerous, are they?
Yes, I don't deny that there is a possible negative side. You could see it in extreme sports, for example, and so forth. But the fact still remains, Mike, you have to balance that out with the fact there are thousands of people who do recreational sport or who do leisure in terms of walking and cycling. They don't necessarily have to sign up with a club, and it gives them a tremendous sense of well-being. It gives them something to do. In fact, it gives them a purpose often in life as they may enter retirement and so forth and so on. We haven't quantified a lot of this, but there's a lot of this going on, and we don't want just to be identified with highly organised competitive sport per se. There are other
but the statistics actually at the moment, the statistics overall say that those people that do go out walking and doing the things that Roy's been talking about don't end up in hospital later on in life. So on well-being, it's the most important factor of sport, and I think that's why we should encourage everything that goes on right across the board. Exercise
isn't necessarily sport, though, is it? This is the structure. To do sport, you have to have some sort of structure. Don't you? You need facilities, pitches, places to do it, generally speaking.
Well, I appreciate your questions on this, Mike, but let's get back to this document. The Fort Regent Political Steering Group was set up to look at politically something to do with Fort Regent, and what they've actually done with this document, they've realised there is great opposition to handing Fort Regent over to the private sector. I started campaigning to keep Fort Regent out of the hands of the private developers in 2002, when the late Senator Mike Vibert proposed to move all of the sports clubs, all of the sports facilities to a purpose-built facility at La Rocquiere School. Thankfully, we put up a good campaign and we stopped that from happening. Now, what we have now is we've had the amalgamation of all of the sports facility to be handed over in this new document. This is going to the states. This is going to be voted on, and we are going to see a new frame form for handing over all of our sports facilities, not just Fort Regent. This isn't about Fort Regent now. They've realised there's great opposition to that. And I'd like to ask Deputy herissier what the findings of the political steering group were, and who the civil servant is that's going to be appointed. What is the time frame to that to be appointed? Because on my last conversation with Senator Ozef, he would not answer any of the financial questions surrounding this. You know, a lot of this, and with all due respect to the Sports Council, where were the Sports Council in 2002 when they were handing over Fort Regent? Because I contacted the Sports Council and I was told it's nothing to do with us. Fort Regent has never had any support from the Jersey Sports Council whatsoever. I've been running this campaign for 10 years. I've publicly been out in the public sphere campaigning on behalf of Fort Regent. That is public land that we are now going to see handed over to the private sector through the back door of this document. So where has the Sports Council been for the last 10 years in stopping that from happening?
There is no set agenda behind that consultation document. I expect a lot of hot and hairy and intense argument about how we deal with facilities, and that's how it should be. There are people in Jersey who feel the states don't run things efficiently. There are people who feel they do, and there are people who feel they are the jewels in our crown. They should remain so, And while they remain so, we can improve the way we run it. In other words, no, I've got to finish this because Roy made some very strong statements, which he's entirely entitled to make, and I hope he plays a really intense and dedicated part in this consultation. But the idea that this document is a preemptive document where the whole issue of privatisation has been sewn up, I refute.
But it is yet another invitation for the government, for the public to come forward with the ideas to solve the problem, or whatever the perceived problem might be. Now, I've attended interminable meetings, especially at Fort Regent, where the government has been doing the self-same thing, asking the public, my perception is the government ought to be coming out with specific proposals, and therefore the discussion would be rather more meaningful.
They have come out with specific proposals, and the proposals are to hand Fort Regent over to the private sector. Now,
where does it say that?
I've got a statement off of the States of Jersey website here, and this is the Fort Regent Political Steering Group interim report.
Right.
Now, we have never seen an interim report from the Political Steering Group. Would Deputy herissier please give us the content of that report, and what did they find? What did they come up with?
Well, that was a report, as I understand it, Roy, that was chaired by Deputy Reid. He could only, when he was Minister of Education, because he followed up on a scrutiny panel report, which I chaired actually. And what he tried to do was build consensus about how the fort could go forward. And as I understand it, their recommendations, which the new steering committee looked at, but it's not made much movement in the last year because of other priorities, what they basically suggested was further research on emphasising its heritage role, further research on what were the capital expenditures required to keep the fort, for example, the roof. Although it actually looks quite good from a distance, it's been there an awful long time and there are big sums of money involved. Yes, further research on what could be, Roy is quite right, some of the public-private partnerships. But where he's wrong, I would suggest, is in suggesting because you talk of public-private partnerships, it doesn't mean the private sector takes control. There are different kinds of partnerships. And the other thing was, basically, how can we enhance even more? Because we are, like Roy, we're incredibly proud of what happens at the fort. How can we advance those activities?
I've been to 2 or 3 meetings at the fort where I've been invited along. The one thing that I would have to say is not so much about the sports people, and that's why probably we haven't got involved. Because the first issue was, what do we do with the old swimming pool? The second issue, what do we do with the land? You had planning issues around the outside of the fort, and nobody would seem to move until they knew what was going on outside. Most of the sports people up there, and I totally agree with you, I think it's tremendous, the number of different sports that go on up there, and we should maintain it. I don't think that's an issue at all. The biggest problem I have is that knowing quite a lot about what happened at Beausejour and what's going on over there at the present time, because they are gone out to tender to see whether they take everything outside. But the one fundamental thing that everybody's got to get and understand is that Beausejour is a purpose-built sports centre. This was a fort.
Now the need for forts as such as a centralised sporting venue has diminished. So what I perceive that you're left with sporting activities there which are not going to generate enough money to make that place self-sufficient. So therefore, my perception is that people like the Treasury are going to look at it and say, we're not going to subsidise that anymore, because the sporting activities we're out in the countryside, out in the parishes, are self-sufficient. They can carry on regardless. That's okay. Is that a fair, or is that a...
No. Roy may have other views on this, obviously. No, that isn't fair, because the focus of the fort, you've got to remember, we're only a tenant at the fort, education, sport and culture. We are not the owners of the fort. We are not the sole operators. We want to see other complementary activities occurring, like heritage, and so forth and so on. But the main focus of the fort for education, sport and culture is the running of the active card system, and that brings in a tremendous amount of people, some of them on health related programs, as we were mentioning, and the competition is not with single sport clubs like the badminton club and so forth. It might be with fitness clubs, you know, the fitness first type operations you see. It might be with them, but the focus is on running a club with a fairly heavy social aspect to it. In terms of the groups, we try and bring in a side of the people who use it simply as a club.
Hugh?
Well, I mean, I just follow on from what Roy's saying. I actually would like to know, I mean, Roy, you probably know, how many different sports go on up at the fort?
Well, there's far too many to mention. I mean, you've got badminton, you've got martial arts going on, you've got the weight training area, which is a massive
Can we get away from what Mike was saying, and that is those sports that need, I mean, you've got shooting and you've got archery, you've got all sorts of different weightlifting, and you've got all sorts of the martial arts are up there, all individual associations and sports that go on there.
Yes.
Now, coming back down to the thing that Roy is saying, and that is that I think you need to provide that facility, and that facility must be at a centre point. There's car parking, it's the centre of town, you can get to it. Five-a-side football is another one that goes on up there.
Correct.
But you also have to make sure that where I am slightly probably against Roy on certain aspects, and that is that the state must appreciate they have to provide a facility for the general public. And I hate the phrase, but it has to be affordable to all. And we always get this perception of Jersey being a wealthy island, but there are people out there.
The current subsidy for the fort is about £1 million.
It's £500,000 a year.
Half a million.
Yeah, I think that they'd argue that it's a bit more purely because of the upkeep. It's not a sports
I've got the
facility.
expenditure in front of me right here.
You'll find that.
497,400.
And are you happy with that? Would you say?
Well, I think what you have to put is in perspective. You know, we've just subsidised the Jersey Rugby Club over £100,000 a year, which I think personally is an outrage. When we have put on international karate tournaments at Fort Regent, we went to the Education, Sport and Culture in 2002 and 2003 and had to pay £1,000 a day for the use of the rotunda. And yet we've been told that without having quantifiable evidence that this money going to one sports club on this island is generating any economic activity. We were bringing over hundreds of people through the years. Roy MacDonald has done it with his martial arts school. We've put on international tournaments, European tournaments, and had no help whatsoever from Education, Sport and Culture to do this.
And lots of those actually pay rent to the
They all
schools.
pay rent to the school.
That's
Now, which is a very good point you brought up there. When the idea of handing over the fort to the private sector was first mooted, there was a subsequent increase in rents year on year on year. And at one point, I know I went into the press with this as well, because nobody else in the sports fraternity was doing it, they put the rent up by 50%. How on earth is that helping and supporting the clubs up there? I mean, try to start a new club up there, it is financially impossible to do so. And that has been systematically put in place at the time to remove the sports clubs, to say the facility is derelict, there's nobody using it, and hand that to the private sector. And this has been engineered by the state.
You're in the Shire fan, Roy.
Well, I'd ask one simple question. How on earth, if that's the case, how on earth the private sector ever going to make it work?
Exactly, which is why it comes back to, and it clearly states in this document that the taxpayer will be subsidising it, which is why I'm sitting here now having this conversation, because the cost of the development, we're subsidising it £500,000 at the moment, and when you look at that in terms of subsidising health and social security, £100 million a year on welfare benefits now, this is minuscule compared to the sort of cost that the states are expending at the moment, which is why it should stay exactly as it is. It is a cost-effective amenity to the public of this island and to the taxpayer. Because if this goes into the private sector, as we've seen on the waterfront, as we've seen on all public-private partnerships, the Connex bus service, over £4 million a year, the Liberty bus, all of these public-private partnerships, Jersey Post, they do not work, and they are costing the taxpayer hundreds of millions of pounds every year in subsidies. And this is exactly what will happen with this document.
What's the gut? What do you? You're in the States. What message do you get in the States? Is there an appetite to subsidise sporting activities, or is it not?
I would say there is, but I mean, they obviously want to know, as I said at the beginning of my little piece, they want to know that we're running it as efficiently as possible. But yes, the Fort programme at the moment, the one that we run at the Fort called Active, there is a subsidy, as Roy has said. We bring in groups who don't and are not required to pay the full economic costs. Some of them come in for free. That's no problem. It's part of dealing with broader social needs. and so forth. But I really want to come back to it, and I hope, and I'm sure Roy will put in a very strong and trenchant paper about this, but I want to come back to the fact that it is not at the moment government policy to privatise the fort. It is not government. There may be more private sector involvement in the fort, there may be more rental of facilities, for example, and so forth and so on, for the kind of reasons that Hugh has said.
Well,
economically speaking, you are never, quite frankly...
It's a very clear trend throughout this government, as regards all activities, but it's been a very clear trend through sporting activities, as I say, since the fort was founded, that things are getting privatised. It is the trend.
Well, I'm lost here. I spent the afternoon talking to two sports about their lease with property holdings. If you go outside of St Helier and go outside of the fort, you've got tennis clubs, yachting clubs, sailing clubs, equestrian. They're all renting property from the states on longer leases than they used to. They're actually giving back to the people that run it.
And are they subsidised by the states?
At the present, no, they pay a lease on it. The debate comes, the biggest problem with that.
Privatised is my concept.
Yeah, but the biggest problem with that is that you never know how much it costs in the first place. So is it being privatised? But if somebody that is running an equestrian centre is renting it, the buildings and everything from the states, then surely that's good. That's got to be totally positive.
Excellent. But if they start to lose money, will the states step in and subsidise it? This is the point, isn't it?
Well, I mean, that will only be borne out by the number of people that do it. But you've got two tennis clubs, for instance, Lemuel and Granville. They rent from the states. They've been going since in the mid-70s. They've had to increase their membership and their affiliation fees, but they've done it because people want to have their own club. I'm just slightly concerned when I start hearing that all this is going out to be, you know, nationalised almost, or being given out to the private sector. Because, sorry, that's the wrong, but it seems to me that we're trying to help as many people as possible.
I should have asked you at the beginning a bit about the role of the Sports Council. Where in all this does the Sports Council...
Well, that is a very good point, and it's one that I would love to have a debate on, because I think that we were having a discussion yesterday. You've got the Sports Council, the Advisory Council, you've got all these different, what's the word now, silos. Everybody's in different silos, and in a small island we should be all working together. I get concerned that if it's not broken, don't mend it, and if these things are working. The Sports Council years ago used to be very much facility operated. And they were pushing, and there was a lot more money around to be able to help clubs and clubs to be able to extend their facilities. It's now gone to making sure that we look after them. I think that the infrastructure of a lot of sports need help, and I think that that's where the Sports Council comes into play. We don't have money, we can advise and we can shout.
Where do you get money from? If somebody wants money, how do you help them get it?
Via the Advisory Council at the present time, which is a grant via the states. And that comes out. Now there is all sorts of... And we also encourage a lot of sports, and the martial arts are just as strong. You've got a lot of sports with sponsorship and everything else. It is getting harder, and it is getting harder when you get one particular sport that probably has got more sponsors than anybody else, and they've moved aside. But the point is that we've got to be there. We're there helping them. We're there to move on. And I do get very conscious of the fact that you've still got to pay a fee. You can't go anywhere. You can't go anywhere without paying something, and I think people have to be realistic that if they want their own club and they want to run it, then they've got to pay appropriate affiliation fees.
Can I just ask you how much the Sports Council is getting in a grant at the moment?
Nothing.
You're getting absolutely nothing. Because that's, according to what I've got written down here, when the subsidy was announced by Deputy Ryan that the Sports Council's grant was going to get cut.
The Sports Advisory Council.
It's the Sports Advisory. There's two, Roy, there's two. There's the Sports Advisory and there's the Sports Council.
Because this says the Jersey Sports Council.
Yeah, I know. I think that was where that confusion did. We don't get anything.
Right.
And that's the one thing that I'll point out very strongly is
so why are these people getting, or were getting, £176,000 of taxpayers' money?
We get that to give to the sports. So the Advisory Council. I sit on that as well.
So you do get some subsidies then? Yeah, you do get money from
Can
the
I just
states.
say, the chairman of the Sports Council is a totally separate body which is totally run by volunteers. It is a voice for sport. It doesn't have any elected members from the government. It doesn't have any civil servants on board. It's a totally independent volunteer organisation.
Because it was announced by Deputy Ryan.
The Advisory Council, which is chaired by a group of people, there are 5 people from the outside and 4 people from the States.
Okay, well if you are sort of involved in this somewhere along the line, the grant was £176,000. And it was going to be cut by 80% to £37,000.
That's when the Sports Council last year stood up and started screaming and shouting.
The Sports Council?
Yes.
It was reduced.
Okay, so it was reduced, okay.
And then
on the 7th of February, the Jersey Sports Group got an extra £84,500 from the Minister after the announcement that the budget was to be cut.
Yes.
So, were any negotiations between January and February? Something must have happened between here and here.
Yeah, I did exactly what you do, and that was that I went out and used the press, and because I was pretty well known, I was saying, look, hang on a minute, 37,000 is peanuts. You might as well give it back to the States. What can you do with 37,000? And we won the day. And I've got to say, Roy and Patrick were brilliant. We got together and we said, look, this is crackers. Because running sports on 37, where they've been used to 175,000, at the present time, we're fortunate that anybody goes off the island to represent their club, association, get circa £30 for every trip. That's what that money is used for.
Can I just ask, why, Roy, are you not involved in the Sports Council and sports? Why?
Because the Sports Council is an anonymous body as far as I'm concerned. I've been training in martial arts since I was 15 years old. And to my knowledge, none of the martial arts schools have ever been members of the Jersey Sports Council. Because the Sports Council seems to concentrate on the other major sports, football, rugby, etc. So as far as we were concerned, we paid for everything whenever we did anything. But it concerns me greatly when I hear the same rhetoric coming from the Sports Council now, as I heard in 2002 from the then Senator Vibert, that we're not going to be doing it. But this document that we're here discussing at the moment clearly states that the Jersey Sports Council is going to be, and the new body would be accountable to the states of Jersey through the Minister for Education, Sport and Culture, and act as a voice for sport and champion the sector. There may be many successful examples of this in other jurisdictions. The creation of a trust could potentially create a clear structure for sport in Jersey. Now, the other thing that we're not being told by the politicians is that once this trust is set up, we are going to enter into a new era where these trusts, along with the new housing trust, where we've just heard that they're in the process to look to borrow £200 million for a housing boom project, is that this trust, once set up, will be able to borrow money. And this is an extremely serious, concerning development where we are going to be subsidised by the taxpayer and have the potential to borrow money and say that it's in the best interest of sports, which it is not.
He slightly changed the wording there. It's not. It was not set up to borrow money, and I don't think any of the trusts would be set up to borrow money.
Right.
You changed it to potential.
No, I think Roy is making a direct comparison with housing
it says
trusts.
potentially.
The only similarity, in a sense, is the word trust. The intention, Roy, can I also say, there are options presented in that paper, and the continuum is from the states continuing to run sport and giving grants to people like the Sports Advisory Council, which are ultimately accountable in the way they spend it to the states, or to privatisation. The sort of option, and they're presented in the paper, the discussion's going to be about them. I think what Roy was reading out was something that they have in Guernsey called the Sports Commission. The Sports Commission.
It's written in your new document.
What happened with the Sports Commission in about 2003 in Guernsey, all the funding, the government funding that went into sports was put to the Commission. It was ring-fenced. Now, admittedly, it may well have stagnated, but they were given the freedom, I don't think to borrow money, they were given the freedom to go to the private sector or to big donors, interested donors, to raise money and to develop a range of programs.
I would like to finish off with saying that Fort Regent has already been passed for development as Project 181, which has been passed by the states of Jersey and still stands for redevelopment into the Jersey Sporting Centre of Excellence. And until that P181 has been rescinded, I don't see how the states of Jersey can be pushing forward a document like this when it has already been passed with plans to be developed into a sporting centre of excellence. Thank you very much.
That is the final word. Thank you very much.